Hello everybody, it is Joel from Guys on Gaffr here, and I've got something a little bit different for you today. Instead of our kind of normal, longer pods, I've got a short solo video for you today, all about Gaffr Super League. It's a game that launched a few days ago, and I wanted to essentially try and engage some new players and get some new players into Gaffr Super League. I think it's an amazing format, a really, really fun game, and I think more people should play it. It's always got a kind of little group of people who play, but I would love to see the numbers of Super League players get up close to what we see in the Championship game, which is obviously quite popular. And so, yeah, consider this video a little bit of a sales pitch for those of you who have never played Gaffr Super League before. I'm hoping to be able to convince you today to give it a go this season, because I really do think you'll enjoy it a lot. That's what this video is all about, and there will be some beginner tips at the end. So if you are already a Gaffr Super League player and you're planning on playing this season, and you know what's what, and you've played it before, this video is probably not for you. But if you've never played it before, this is for you, and hopefully this will be useful, and hopefully you will give this game a go. We will see. Obviously, no pressure. No one's forcing you to do anything, but I'm going to sell it as hard as I can. So here we go. First of all, for those of you who don't know, what is Gaffr Super League? So it's a season-long game that follows the league schedule for the top 4 teams from last season in each of the 5 big leagues. So that's obviously Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, Bundesliga, and Ligue 1. I'll say the French way, I guess. It's featuring all of the top teams in Europe from these top leagues that performed so well last season, all in one game. So you're picking a squad of 15 with a mixture of players from all of these leagues. Normal rules kind of apply in terms of 3 players per team, but you've also got this limit of 5 players per league maximum that you can pick. And it follows, I guess it's part of the Gaffr collection, so it has kind of familiar Gaffr rules. So those of you who aren't familiar with the Gaffr platform, Gaffr has run a game for the Championship, the second tier of English football, and it's going into its 5th season now, and it's been a very, very popular game with a really great community behind it on Twitter or X. They also added Super League, which is now coming into its 3rd season, and they've also just new this season added Scottish Premier League Fantasy after the kind of main platform for the Scottish Premiership fantasy football game essentially said they couldn't run it again this year, so they've kind of taken up the mantle, and so it's the 1st season of Gaffr's Scottish Premiership Fantasy. So Gaffr has got this nice little collection of games now. They've also run competitions and games during major tournaments like the Euros just gone and the World Cup. They are a really great platform, a community-run platform, just 2 guys who have poured a lot of time and effort into making this really great platform all by themselves with, little to no kind of financial backing. So they've done an amazing job, and they do it just for, they get nothing out of it apart from kind of providing enjoyment for all of us. So yeah, it's a really great platform. That's what the Gaffr platform is. You can check out the rules and how they differ slightly from FPL, but that's, I guess, a little bit of background. In terms of then why play this game? Now, the first point is premiums galore, which means tough decisions to be made and more varied teams. I mean, we see in lots of other games like FPL, there are not that many premium options often that stand up and are viable. There may be multiple premiums, but some of them turn out to not be good value, for example. And that can lead to kind of heavy template. And so therefore, we all think a really template game is maybe slightly less enjoyable because it's really difficult to make up ground, particularly if you're not doing particularly well. In this game, it's really not like that. In my experience, there has been a noticeable lack of a template just because of how many different players you can choose from. You've got not only your Haalands and your Salahs of the Premier League, but you've got Mbappe, you've got Harry Kane, you've got Vinicius Jr., you've got all sorts of players who are absolutely brilliant and give you really tough decisions because you can only pick a couple of them and you can only afford a couple of them, and it means that you've really got to nail those picks. And I think that makes it a really, really enjoyable experience and a really thought-provoking game. Point two, you can enjoy and learn about the other big leagues if that's something that you care about. Some of you might be like, nah, don't need to learn about Serie A, but for those of you who want to kind of widen your football knowledge a bit through a fantasy game, I think it's a really great way of doing that. I mean, I found that with the Championship game. Part of the reason why I played that game when it first came out was because I wanted to learn about the Championship, and I thought the fantasy game was a good gateway to me following it a bit more closely. And now I love the Championship. If you want to get into some of the other big leagues, I think this is a good way of doing that. There is opportunity for huge scores through the Gaffr boosts. So the boosts combined with the fact that you have these premium players, more premium players to pick from, means that you can go really, really big. I think there was a point where I was seeing gains of upwards of 80 points on a triple, which, if you're not aware, is a boost where you choose 3 players to get triple points for a week, and you can just see massive scores when you've got these premiums in good fixtures and in double game weeks. And who doesn't love a nice, huge score? You can sometimes see in Gaffr, upwards of 200 in a game week through these boosts. For those of you who aren't aware of the boosts, it does work slightly differently to FPL. You get 3 sets of boosts throughout the season, and each set contains 6 boosts, of which you would choose 3. So all throughout the season, you'll have the opportunity to play boosts. It won't just be kind of reserved for the end of the season. It's great test of planning and problem solving, and I'm going to come on to one of the reasons for that later on. But it really, really does make you think, this game, for many reasons. And fixture scheduling is a big one of those, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that shortly. And this it's just very fun. It's just a really, really fun game, being able to pick from this wider pool of players, 20 different teams, but they're all top teams. And you get to have, players like Mbappe and Salah in the same team, for example. A couple of seasons ago, there was Messi in your team alongside Haaland, things like that. It's really, really fun. Those are a few reasons to play. Now, in my time playing Super League, I've come across a few things that some people have said, or may have given us reasons to not play or to give up on the game if they've started. I'd quite like to address some potential objections and say, some of these are very valid thoughts. Nothing wrong with having these opinions at all, but I would like to maybe provide some kind of counter to all of these. So the first one is, I do not have in-depth knowledge of all 5 leagues. And I know many of you be thinking, if you want to really commit to a fantasy game, you need to understand all 5 leagues in a lot of depth. And what I mean by that is all of the teams, not just the 4 from each league that are present. So, if you're going to understand what actually is a good fixture, I need to understand how strong Las Palmas is in La Liga. I need to understand how good their season is. Maybe I want to understand their matchups and whether they've got a particularly strong defence or not, so that I know whether it's a good attacking fixture or a good defensive fixture, things like that. And yes, of course, having the in-depth knowledge of all 5 leagues would be very beneficial. But I imagine the vast majority of the player base, do not have that knowledge at all. For me, all you really need is to brush up on those 20 teams. You will already know a lot about the 4 Premier League teams. If you follow the Champions League, as I'm sure a lot of you would do, you probably know a lot more about some of the other big teams like Real Madrid. Maybe it's just some of those teams that came through this year, or the previous year, that maybe had a surprise season, like Brest from the French League, for example, who you might know very little about. There might just only be a handful of teams that you really need to get yourself clued up on, to get yourself up to speed. And then in terms of understanding kind of what is a good fixture from an attacking and a defensive point of view, sometimes all it really requires is a quick look at the league table to see some of the main stats for that team. How many goals have they conceded? How many goals have they scored? What's their expected goals and expected goals against for the opponents, if you're weighing up captaincy of Mbappe at home to Las Palmas versus Kane at home to Hoffenheim or something. You can really do that in 2 minutes with a quick Google, a quick look at sites like FBref, for example, and you can really, really quickly just get at least a gauge, even without having ever watched the team or knowing much about the team. So I really wouldn't let that put you off at all. Number 2, I don't have time to watch matches from other leagues. And this is another thing where most of us probably don't, to be honest, who play the game, so you're in good company there. There'll be very, very few in the player field that are watching all 5 leagues religiously. Maybe what you could do instead is, obviously just watch a game or 2 when you can of certain teams. That's what I tend to do. Just every now and again, not all that often. Or maybe on a Champions League night, take a break from watching an English team. You watch them every week in the Premier League anyway. Maybe stick on a game between 2 Super League teams. Maybe stick on, Atalanta against Lille, if that's on in the Champions League. Or maybe a more exciting matchup like Bayern Munich against Inter Milan, things like that. Maybe, just switch that around kind of in midweek if you're watching the Champions League. But yeah, you'll be in very good company in terms of not watching all the matches for all those teams, because it is a lot when you've got the Premier League and other fantasy games to worry about. Number 3, I can just play Champions League fantasy. Well, yes, that is true, but this game is only 20 teams and the Champions League is 36 teams, and arguably I think you have to do a lot less research in this to get yourself up to speed. You don't need to look at who's good for a random Turkish team like Galatasaray or something, or a team like RB Salzburg. You don't have to get up to speed with teams from these kind of lesser leagues, the leagues that don't get as much coverage, to kind of bargain hunt and things like that. You can just stick to these 20 teams, so fewer teams to actually get up to speed on, and they're all in the same 5 leagues. So I would argue it's actually probably one that requires less initial knowledge than the Champions League fantasy game, to be honest. Maybe play it alongside Champions League fantasy. Number 4, now this is an interesting one. It's too chaotic and high variance, so luck is an even bigger factor. And you know what? This statement is absolutely true in that it is much more chaotic. It's much more high variance. And yes, luck is a much bigger factor in this game. And all I'm going to say to that is, that's true. Embrace it. See it as part of the fun. It's, all fantasy games are different. And if all games were like this, I agree, it would probably be an issue. If all fantasy games had such crazy swings. But, add something a little bit different. And, see the potential for big swings to be a real fun part of the game. Maybe it means that you can make up a lot of ground on people at the top of the leaderboard. Maybe you can overturn that 50-point gap that you have with a boost or 2 with 5 game weeks to go and move up from 5th in the rankings to winning the whole thing, So yeah, there's that. Which also actually gives me another thing that I didn't put on the previous slide in terms of why play. This is actually probably a really good shot for most of you to actually do really, really well in the fantasy game, or even win it in terms of the player base, because none of us are really ever going to, aside from an extraordinary season, challenge at the top of the FPL leaderboard. But you do really get the chance in these Gaffr games to challenge at the top of leaderboards and come close to winning fantasy games, or even winning a fantasy game. So there's that as well. Number 5, finding injury and suspension news is too difficult and time consuming. Another valid point, that it is quite tricky to collate these things and find out this information from various different places for various different leagues. Not helped by the fact that flags often lag a week behind on the Gaffr system, or at least they did last season. So that's an important fact to know, that the flags you can't really trust on the Gaffr website. Now, I'm going to put a link to a website in the description. It's called sportsgambler.com. And actually, I look at this every week, and it takes 5 minutes tops to find what I need to find. You can just select a league, and you can see all of their injury and suspension news. Obviously, you don't get context like manager quotes. Obviously, you'd have to dig a lot deeper for that. But you can very quickly see, this player is suspended for 2 games. Okay, I won't bring him in. You can quickly see new injuries that have come in and an estimated time that they'll spend out, a kind of estimated timeline for their injury. It's obviously not perfect, it's following it religiously, but it's generally pretty accurate. And you can do it in 5 minutes. So when you're sorting out your team, maybe you come up with your transfers and you just do a quick check of that website. I'm not bringing in an injured player, am I? I'm not missing any of my players that are now injured. and then you're away. You can also look at predicted lineup sites. Obviously, they can be hit and miss at times, but they can also be helpful in terms of giving you a little guide. So it doesn't have to take long. It can take you 5-10 minutes to check these things every week, tops. So I wouldn't worry about that. So hopefully I've given a convincing sales pitch there, and that some of you who are watching this video are going to try Gaffr Super League this season. And now I'm going to offer some beginners tips. Again, a lot of this, if you're familiar with Gaffr Super League, will not be groundbreaking information, but they might be helpful for new players. So number one is a really, really big one, and one of the most unique factors of this game that I find really cool. 5 different league schedules means the numerous blanks and doubles throughout the season, so plan accordingly. Obviously, all 5 league seasons are not going to mirror each other exactly. The French League and Bundesliga both only have 18 teams, so they only play 34 times as well. So that leads to blanks. And so there are more doubles than there are in other games, just because of these different schedules. And so something you've got to be looking at quite frequently throughout the season, including in the first half of the season. And a little more on a particularly challenging period of the season shortly. Number 2, the cheap players still play for great teams, so there's plenty of good value to be found. Obviously, like I was saying before, with multiple premiums, you can only select 2, 3 max, but honestly, picking 3 premiums, like 3 players over 11 million or something, it becomes really difficult to pick a team. But yeah, the cheaper players still play for great teams, so there's plenty of good value to be found. They can, they're still playing for a team that finished in the top 4 of the league last season, even the cheaper options. So yeah, plenty of good value to be found if you go looking. Last season's surprise packages often failed to back it up the next year, so despite point 2, some teams you might want to avoid. We've seen in previous years things like Union Berlin last year. They were in the Super League game, but they barely avoided relegation, and so they weren't a factor in our seasons. A couple of the French teams like Rennes, they finished maybe mid-table, like 10th-ish. These teams that overperform, they do often regress. So be careful of those teams. And they may be ones to avoid. So like this year, that could be something like Brest in the French league, Girona maybe in the Spanish league, for example. So yeah, you do have to be careful, but that can become quite clear quite quickly. After a few game weeks in the season, you can see that certain teams aren't quite what they were the previous year. And number 4, don't block yourself from appealing assets due to the maximum 5 players per league rule. So this is particularly important when you're picking your fodder players, like your 4.5 million midfielder or whatever that you're just never going to play. If there are any leagues that you think you're going to need 5 proper assets for, you maybe shouldn't pick any fodder from that league. So just be careful to not block yourself out, particularly when you've got things like doubles to consider and blanks. And finally, the last couple of things to talk about, just the fixture schedule in a bit more detail, and then that will be that. So as I said before, 5 different league schedules means blanks and doubles that you wouldn't expect, and obviously you get more blanks for Bundesliga and Ligue 1 because they only play 34 times. And so I've flashed up the first 10 game weeks there, and you can see for game week 1, no Bundesliga. And then in game week 2, you go straight into a La Liga double, and they also do in game week 5 with a double for Serie A in game week 9. This is actually more doubles than we had last season in the first sort of third of the season. We only had 1 double last season for both. I think it was both La Liga and Serie A in the same week, but 3 this time around, which is interesting, I guess. Does shoehorn things a little bit when it comes to boosts, but. So hopefully that illustrates kind of what I'm talking about with the differing schedules, and you can kind of see how all that works. With kind of it's generally based around midweek rounds and when they get placed for the different leagues. But the big one's the festive period. So you may or may not know that there are winter breaks that take place during the festive period in France, Germany, and Spain, and that causes all sorts of chaos. Every single year, and it's one of the first things you look at in the fixture tick. You're like, how on earth am I going to navigate that? And if that's what you're thinking, how on earth am I going to navigate that? Me too, every single time. and that's just part of the challenge. And that season, you just got to embrace like it could go really badly. I mean, you can see in there, game week 17, just the Premier League play, and that's happened in all 3 seasons. There's been a week with just the Premier League plays, which means you only have 5 players because there's a 5 player per league rule, which in a sense makes it easier because you can't just spend more transfers to get 11 Prem players, but you just kind of have to roll with it during that time period and plan as best you can. So you can see those gaps of 3 consecutive weeks where, La Liga don't play and Bundesliga don't play, and Liga also have a 3-game week period where they don't play. So it's interesting times when it gets to that point. And actually, this is something else that I really didn't catch on to until it was almost too late. When I played my overhaul in something like game week 17 last season or game week 16, I had not considered the Super Cups for Italy and Spain. So they, and maybe France, I'll come on to why, but particularly for Italy and Spain, where they take, I think it is the top 2 in the league and the domestic cup winners and finalists, so 4 teams. They stick them in a semi-final and final. So basically like the Premier League's Community Shield, but with 4 teams. And they do them in early January. And they do it in Saudi Arabia as well, which is, I guess a lot of things are moving that way at the moment. But anyway, and I hadn't clocked that last season at all, which meant suddenly I had players in my team that I thought were playing in like game week 20 or something, and then they were blanking. So I'm much more aware of that this season, and it will cause extra complications and extra blanks in game week 19 and 20 for certain teams in those leagues. And I've put maybe France because their Super Cup was supposed to be happening in August, but it got postponed, and I don't think there's a date in yet, so I don't know when that's going to be. So that's just another thing to watch out for. It adds even more chaos to what was already a tricky period of the season. But as I said before, you just got to embrace the chaos with this game, and the highs and lows that come with that, the huge scores in the doubles and the absolute mess that you can get into if you're not careful. But that's just part of the game, and that's why it's great. I think that's why it's such a good game. Last slide, the domestic cups. Obviously, we're going to have fewer blanks and doubles this season because the quarterfinals of the FA Cup don't clash with any league rounds this time around. And actually, when you think about Super League, outside of England, generally domestic cup matches are played midweek in all the other leagues, which means we actually don't tend to see postponements due to cup participation for teams outside of the Premier League. So we don't end up with those kind of as many blanks and doubles for cup participation reasons towards the end of the season. So it's just the Premier League, and I've just put the game weeks there for the Premier League. Game week 29 is the Carabao Cup final, and game week 34 is the FA Cup semi-finals, where we could have the blanks. So it's actually a lot less of a factor than it is in FPL. It's more just the schedule based double game weeks that you do still have towards the end of the season. So that's it. So hopefully that's been a useful video. Hopefully you're going to give this a go, and hopefully the beginner tips were useful. And I'll be about. You can get in touch with me on X ffjoel_ if you'd like, if you have any questions or want to discuss anything. I'm sure we'll be around with a little bit of Super League content during the season. EFL Fantasy is also, I'm sure, going to have Super League content as well, probably a bit more than us. So do check them out if you're not already aware of them. And that is all. So enjoy the rest of your pre-season planning for all the fantasy games that you're playing, everyone. And Guys on Gaffr will be back shortly with some more content. Goodbye.